Class, this is the lesson 4.7 video on the quadratic formula. The objectives is to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula and also to determine the number of solutions by using the discriminant. So as you can see from objective 1 that the quadratic formula is another method that we're going to use to help us solve quadratic equations. So in the last couple sections we have been solving quadratic equations by factoring. Now we're going to use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is powerful because it always works. So sometimes you can't find the solutions to a quadratic equation when you're factoring, and so if that's ever the case, you got to use the quadratic formula. So that's why it's powerful. And then here's what it is right over here. Got to memorize this. So it's x equaling negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's jump in with problem 1. So using the quadratic formula, what are the solutions? And the steps are laid out here. So the first step is we're going to write it in standard form. So we're going to have to subtract 4 from both sides. So we're going to be left with 2x squared minus x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, because 4 minus 4 is 0 there. So that's the first step. Make sure it's in standard form. The second step is to write down what your a, b, and c are. So the a is going to be 2, the b is going to be negative 1 here, and our c, our constant, is negative 4. The next step is to write down the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. The fourth step is to plug in, substitute a, b, and c into the formula. So x equals. Now, this is where you may run into an issue if you're not careful. Always write down that negative sign. And then whatever your b is, get into a habit of putting it in parentheses. So our b is negative 1. That way you don't lose the negative. Plus or minus the square root, b squared, so negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4, which is our c, all over 2a, and our a is 2. Alright, so a negative, this will be a negative 1 if you will. So negative 1 times a negative 1 gives us a positive 1. So we have 1 plus or minus, and then this you'd want to plug into the calculator. Alright, so you'd have negative 1 squared. That would give us, so if we plug that whole thing into the calculator, you're going to get 33. So we're going to have plus or minus the square root of 33 all over 4. Alright, so this plus or minus means that we're going to have two solutions. So our first solution is going to be x equals 1 plus the square root of 33 divided by 4. And then the next one's going to be x equals 1 minus the square root of 33 over 4. So that's what that plus or minus means. Alright, and then the final step is to put it into the calculator. So when we put in, and I would put in 1 plus the square root of 33, I would hit enter, and then I would divide by 4, and you will get an answer that's approximately 1.686. And then over here I'd hit in 1 minus the square root of 33, hit enter, and then divide that by 4, and you're going to get negative 1.186. So these are the two solutions. Alright, you would not have been able to find these solutions by factoring. Alright, we had to use the quadratic, well, you would have had to use the quadratic formula to find these. Remember that the solutions are the x-intercepts. So if we look here at the graph, notice where the graph crosses the x-axis. It crosses here at approximately negative 1.186 and here at 1.686 approximately. Okay, so the solutions, your solutions to a quadratic equation, are the x-intercepts. Alright, let's go to the next one. Alright, for B, solve 2x squared minus 3x plus 7 equals 0. Alright, so the first step is to make sure that it's in standard form. And it is. Alright, so we can go to the next step, which is to find the values of a, b, and c. So your a is 2. That's the coefficient in front of the x squared term. Your b is negative 3. It's the coefficient in front of the x. And then your constant c is equal to 7. Step 3 is to write the quadratic formula, and then we'll substitute in. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So always write that negative, and then in parentheses put your b, so it's negative 3 plus or minus the square root b squared, so negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 7 all over 2 times 2. Alright, so we have a negative 1 times negative 3, that's going to give us a positive 3, plus or minus the square root of, we're going to put that in parentheses, we're going to put that into the calculator, and when you do that, you're going to get negative 47 all over 2 times 2, which is 4. Now, if you plug in the square root of negative 47 into the calculator, alright, so square root negative 47, you're going to get an error message that's going to say something like, on my calculator, it says non-real answer. Okay, that's because for this problem we have no real solutions. Okay, and we'll get to this in the next part of the lesson, but when what's underneath the square root is negative, as is the case here, so what's under the square root, when it's negative, you're going to have no real solutions. So what this means is if I was to graph this, here's what the graph would look like, something like that. Notice how the graph never crosses this x-axis right here. Alright, so you're not going to have any solutions, because remember, our solutions are where the graph crosses the x-axis. Alright, so just to reiterate, when what's underneath this square root is negative, you're going to have no real solutions. Alright, for problem 2, it's a word problem. Your school's jazz band is selling CDs as a fundraiser. The total profit P depends on the amount X that your band charges for each CD. The equation P equals negative x squared plus 48x minus 30 models the profit of the fundraiser. What is the least amount in dollars you can charge for a CD to make a profit of $200? Okay, so our equation is P equals negative x squared plus 48x minus 300. Alright, and so it tells us that the first step is to substitute. First step here is to substitute 200 in for P. So 200 equals negative x squared plus 48x minus 300. Alright, the next step is to write the equation in standard form. So we have to get everything on one side of the equal sign. So that means we're going to have to subtract 200 from both sides. So 200 minus 200, that's going to give me 0. And then I have negative x squared plus 48x. And then a negative 300 and a negative 200 gives us a negative 500. Okay, and so I'm going to rewrite this as negative x squared plus 48x minus 500 equals 0. There's my equation, my quadratic equation. Now we're going to find the values of a, b, and c. So our a is equal to negative 1, our b is equal to 48, and our c is negative 500. Now we're going to write down the quadratic formula and substitute. So negative b, well, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So write down that negative sign. Our b is 48. And then b squared, so 48 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 500 all over 2 times negative 1. Alright, we're going to come up here, change colors to make it easier to distinguish between the parts. So we have x equals a negative, so we have a negative 1 times 48, that's a negative 48, and then plus or minus the square root. So so you take 48, you're going to take this part and plug it into the calculator. Right, and when you do that, you're going to get 304. And then we're going to divide by 2 times -1 is -2. So our two solutions, x equals -48 plus the square root of 304 divided by -2. And then we're going to have over here, running out of room, x equals -48 minus the square root of 304 all over -2. So when we put this into the calculator, -48 minus the square root of 304 over 2 over -2, sorry, you're going to get approximately 32.71. We rounded to the 100th place because we're dealing with money here. So what x represents is what we're charging for the CD. And then over here we have x going to be approximately 15.28. Alright, so those are the two solutions. So what is the least amount in dollars you can charge for a CD to make a profit of 200? Well, 15.28 is less than 32.71, so there's your answer. So $15.28 is the least you can charge. The most you could charge to make a profit of 200 would be $32.71. Alright, the next part of this lesson is on the discriminant. Alright, so the discriminant is just the b squared minus 4ac found underneath the square root. Alright, so it's just the b squared minus 4ac underneath the square root, and it tells us some things, alright, if we evaluate it. So when b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, you're going to have two real solutions. And we saw that with the first example problem that we did. Now, in the second example problem that we did, our b squared minus 4ac was less than 0. Remember, it was -47. So in that case, you have no real solutions. And again, no real solutions means that the graph of the quadratic equation won't cross the x-axis. If we have two real solutions, notice that the graph will cross the x-axis at two different spots. And then finally, if b squared minus 4ac, when we evaluate that, it's 0, you're going to have one real solution, and that means the graph will cross the x-axis at just one spot. So for problem 3, using the discriminant, what is the number of real solutions of -2x squared minus 3x plus 5? Alright, so we have to write down the discriminant first. So the discriminant is just the b squared minus 4ac. Find the values of a, b, and c. So our a is equal to -2, our b is equal to -3, and our c is equal to 5. And then plug those in. So we're using parentheses when we plug in, so -3 squared minus 4 times -2 times 5. Alright, and so negative 3 squared is 9, and then a negative 4 times a negative 2, that gives us a positive 8. 8 times 5 is a positive 40. So we're going to get 49. This number right here is greater than 0. So you are going to have 2 real solutions. Okay. Now for this one, this is like that second problem that we did. It's the same problem. So write down the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. So our a is 2, our b is negative 3, our c is 7. So plug in. Negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 7. So now we're going to get 9. A negative 4 times 2 is 8. So a negative 8. A negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 7 is negative 56. So we get a negative 47. This answer right here is less than 0. So we have no real solutions. Okay? And then for B, I want you to try this one on your own. Go ahead and hit pause right now. You want to get this in standard form first, and then see if you get the correct number of solutions. Alright, so you want to get this in standard form, so we had to subtract 6x from both sides to get this. And then we got to get the 5 over on the other side, so we got to subtract 5 from both sides, get it into standard form. Your a was 1, your b is negative 6, your c is negative 5. Plug it in. You get positive 56. Because that's greater than 0, 2 real solutions. Alright, so to review, the quadratic formula, super important because it always works. We'll always be able to find the solutions when other methods fail. And then the discriminant can be useful in helping us determine the number of real solutions that the quadratic equation has.